Hey everybody, are we all back from lunch? I guess so. So the next series of presentations that we have is, not surprisingly, about data. And spoiler alert, as most of you know and heard again this morning, the U.S. recorded music business grew by about 16.5% last year to about $8.7 billion. Its highest level in a decade, driven by paid streaming subscriptions, which were up by over 50% on the year. And despite continuing declines in physical media and paid downloads, the recorded music industry is back to where it was in 2008. But growth is good. It's looking like 2018 is on track for a third consecutive year of growth. And to find out more, we have over this next 45 minutes or so a really murderer's row of industry data experts. We will hear from David Price. David is Director of Insight and Analysis at the IFPI. And if you have ever used the Global Music Report or its predecessor, the Recording Industry in Numbers of blessed memory, then you are already familiar with his work. David will speak last. In the middle, we will hear from Josh Friedlander, who is the data guru at the RIAA, where he is Senior VP of Strategic Data Analysis. And in that capacity, he oversees the production of full year and mid-year industry revenue reports. His work informs all of RIAA's public policy, as well as the work that RIAA does in consumer research and other areas. We are also going to hear from Bonnie Nichols. Bonnie is a research analyst at the NEA, the National Endowment for the Arts, and will share some fascinating data with us from the NEA and the Bureau of Economic Analysis. And so the way this is going to work is we will have the three presentations in sequence, and then we'll have an opportunity for Q&A. And so first, here's Bonnie.
Because it's produced by the BEA, it uses the same methodology that the agency uses to produce the main accounts. When we hear GDP, you know what its value is in the media. The methodology the BEA uses to do that is reflected in our satellite account. The whole point of the satellite account is to tease from the main accounts that production, that arts and cultural production. So its main methodology is the classic input-output modeling that the BEA uses. Draws on a number of data sources, but chief among them would be the economic census and the annual business surveys. So our most recent results from our satellite account show that it's 2015. The arts, its many forms, generated $763.6 billion to the U.S. economy, and that's 4.2% of U.S. GDP. It was bigger than we thought it was going to be going into it. It was bigger than what BEA thought it would be going into it. So the account, just like BEA's regular accounts, provides estimates at the commodity level, so goods and services. It also produces estimates of value added or GDP by arts and cultural industries. It provides estimates of employment, multipliers, etc., how a commodity is used once it's produced, what happens to it. And so what I'm going to do here today is just pull up a few highlights from the account that are related to music and the music industry. So in 2015, the U.S. produced 8.4 billion in music performances. This would be performances by symphony orchestras and chamber groups, which is estimated to be 3 billion, and 5.4 billion by what are called music groups that would be non-classical, that would include rock, jazz, country bands, etc. Again, this is at the commodity level. So on the industry level, it's the commodities. So this is the value of the performances. And so after adjusting for inflation, we can kind of look at what's happened to the production of those commodities over time. Our account actually produces estimates back to 1998. So right now it's 98 to 2015. But for this presentation, I've started it in 2005. And what we're seeing here is a softening of production of concerts around the Great Recession, and then a recovery around 2010 or so. Over this time frame, average annual growth rates for the music groups, the non-classical, the growth rate is about 25-26%. For the symphony orchestras and chamber groups, it was 19% after adjusting for inflation. Now, in addition, because we're looking at commodities, the account tells us, okay, this is what was produced, this is what's available through imports, and what happens to it, including exports. So we're able to look at trade in concerts. So this is really the touring performances. U.S. exports would be U.S. bands performing on tour abroad, and then the imports would be bands and acts coming into the United States. And so you can see that up until recent years, the United States tended to run a trade surplus in touring performances. In fact, overall, if you look at all arts and cultural production, we run a trade surplus. Our overall account in trade is to be dominated by movies and TV shows, exports of movies and TV shows. But for concerts, we were running a trade surplus until recent years, and then we started importing more. We needed more acts, whereas our exports of touring performances tended to soften a little. Now, I don't know everything that's behind these trends. I can speculate that the softening of imports at the time frame that we're looking at, that we see that softening, that is at the time period that Bruce Springsteen's World Tour ended. So I don't know if that's perhaps contributing to that softening or not. The strong imports during this time frame, we're looking at 13, 14, and 15. During that time period, there was a successful U2 tour that could be contributing to this. Also, Roger Waters' The Wall tour was very successful, and that may also be contributing to it. And not the least, at least to me personally, this time frame also includes the Stones' Zip Code tour, which was a popular tour, so I just had to fit the Stones into this. Now, last year, for the first time, our account provided estimates at the state level, and so we can look at by industry, value added at the state level, and how much the arts contribute to each state's economy. The sound recording industry, we're probably not too surprised to see that Tennessee kind of jumps out with Nashville as being, way above all the other states once we look at it in terms of that state's economy. That's represented by a location quotient. So a location quotient of 1, which would mean that it's right about average. Above 1 would be above average, and of course below 1 is below average. In Tennessee, once we control for the size of Tennessee's economy, sound recording, it's almost 9 times greater than the national average. So we're probably not too surprised at that, but here we can quantify it. And so when we say that Nashville is Music City, we aren't kidding about that. And I've also shown here the manufacture of musical instruments. And again, Tennessee kind of jumps out as a leader, but it is actually eclipsed a little bit by Montana. Relative to Montana's economy, the musical instrument manufacturing industry it's 4.7 times greater than the national average. It was $10 million. Does anyone know what's in Montana that might be driving this? It's the Gibson. We believe it's the Gibson factory. There's a Gibson guitar factory in Montana, so that's likely contributing greatly to this high location quotient from musical instrument manufacturing in the state. Of course, there is a little wrinkle here. Recently, you may have seen in the press that Gibson has been experiencing some serious financial problems with declared bankruptcy. The last I read that their creditors are willing to work with them, especially if they're staying with their classic work, which is producing guitars. So a little bit of a wrinkle in Montana. Our accounts, I've noticed so much come up today and yesterday about what we might call the creative industries. And so at the National Endowment for the Arts, we define the creative economy as copyright-intensive production, as defined by the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. And so these are the industries that USPTO says are the copyright-intensive. The total is on the left, and then what we consider to be arts and culture is on the right. And so by this definition, by this methodology, the arts account for about half of the creative economy. And I've heard so much today and yesterday about streaming. Now, our account is an arts and culture account. It's not about music per se, or about music streaming per se. So this industry that's labeled other information services, that refers to internet publishing, broadcasting and streaming. It includes music, but also movies and TV shows. This is the fastest growing arts and cultural production industry in terms of value added to the economy. Over this time period, the average annual growth rate was 21%. If you look at all arts and cultural production, 2.6%. So it's very much a fast-growing industry, which probably isn't a surprise to most of you in this industry. Okay, I don't know if that's coming out as a blurry picture. I took this picture of a jazz musician a few years ago in New Orleans. We are currently in the process of producing a report, Artists in the Labor Force. So I'm working on it now. We hope to release it in the early fall. Now because we are a federal government agency, we are using the conventional household surveys. And so the estimates are from the current population survey and from the American Community Survey. Both are household surveys conducted by the Census Bureau. So that's probably not as detailed as a lot of the industry data, or certainly your artist survey, but it's what we were using as a federal government agency. So we'll take a look at some of the statistics there. There are about 194,000 musicians identified by the current population survey in 2017. 188,000 were employed, and the rest would result in a 2.8% unemployment rate. Over time, I thought we could look at how musicians compare with all workers in the labor force and all artists. The NEA includes 11 occupations as artists, so it ranges from architects, designers, all kinds of designers represent the largest share of all artists, but dancers, photographers, writers, and authors. There are 11 different occupations, so that all artists is that aggregate. So by looking at this, the CCS data suggests that musicians kind of had a hard time. Their unemployment rates were higher. They stayed high for a longer period of time, actually peaking around 2013, and then finally coming down. So now it's at a low point, but it does suggest that they had a hard time during the Great Recession. We also track how many people hold second jobs or moonlight as artists. And so again, using the CPS data, this is outgoing rotation of the CPS, tells us about moonlighting people holding second jobs. And if we look at the moonlighting artists, that adds about 12% to the total tally of artists. Usually when we're referring to artists, it's their main job, the job in which they work the largest number of hours. But there are also people who will be adding about 12% if you want to consider moonlighting artists. And the interesting thing, I think, for this group is that a lot of them are musicians. About a third of them are musicians. I heard yesterday about the artist survey that a significant stream of revenue was earnings from giving lessons, music lessons, or just giving lessons. I thought that was interesting when I heard that yesterday because the CBS suggests that for moonlighting artists, many of whom are musicians, their primary job is as a teacher. So they're working in the education industry on payroll, but they moonlight as musicians, as self-employed musicians. So that kind of harmonized a little bit with your data. And you saw some of these statistics yesterday, so I can kind of gloss over this. This is coming from the American Community Survey. It indicates that musicians are a little older than artists as a whole, or the labor force as a whole. So 45 is their median age. They are more likely to be male. I think you heard that yesterday from various data sources. Only 33% are female. They're well educated. It's a well educated group of workers. More than half hold bachelor's degrees or higher levels of training, and that's much better than the labor force. It's a little bit lower than the share holding bachelor's degrees among all artists, but keeping in mind that all artists includes architects, writers and authors, people in those occupations, virtually all of them have at least a bachelor's degree. So, but nonetheless, musicians are well educated. They are very likely to be self-employed, and I think that came up yesterday, so that's not too much of a surprise, even more so than artists as a whole. Percent who work full year, full time, only a small percent are looking at like 31%, so part-time work is a common arrangement for musicians. Now, this is the earnings, 42,000 on average, but it's important that we note that this is among full year, full-time musicians. So other workers, it's a little bit lower than artists make as a whole, and it's even a little bit lower than all workers in the labor force, which might be surprising given that musicians are not so well educated. We might have expected that their earnings to be a little bit higher, but 42,000 is what we're showing. Now, this statistic may come as a surprise. I'm not sure how everyone's going to react to this or see this, but our analysis indicates that women musicians, again, working full year, full time, they get close to parity in earnings with male musicians. And that's a parity that's not enjoyed by other women artists or other women in the labor force. But again, this is among those working full year, full time, so we may be bringing in artists represented by unions, our musicians in symphony orchestras on Broadway. So I don't know if that's, is playing a role here, but they're getting closer to parity. And I thought this might be a fun statistic. So only 12% of all workers in the labor force start work between noon and midnight. It's even lower for artists as a whole, but it's more than a quarter of musicians start their workday between noon and midnight. Some of them are working in nightclubs and on Broadway and so forth. This brings me to, I guess I would call it the shameless commerce section of my presentation. The NEA's keen interest in this organization is to hopefully persuade you to apply to the NEA for a grant, for a research grant. Our office offers research grants. They come in kind of two tools. The main conventional one is just the Art House grant, and that's $10,000 to $30,000. It's a shorter time frame. And then we also have this new tool, which is research labs. And this is over a longer period of time, say 2-3 years, a larger purse. It's like $100,000 and up a little bit from there. It tends to focus on a particular area, so I think for economics and business, you may want to consider the arts, entrepreneurship, and innovation lab. The difference between the two, the first one, just the conventional grants, you would, as researchers or graduate students, have more autonomy, whereas with the research lab, that's done as a cooperative agreement, so you would be working kind of with the NEA if that appeals to you. One benefit of working with the NEA as a cooperator is that the NEA has an Office of Public Affairs, so we can have some publicity on your work. So that's something to consider for the work you're doing. And I think that's all I have today.
How can they find out more about Rainbow?
Oh, you can certainly go to our website. You can approach me. I can give you my card. We need more detailed information. I can refer you to my colleague who runs that program, so please do consider it.
Our next speaker on his way up is Josh Friedlander.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. Thank you, Bonnie. And I just want to note that this is the first time I think I've been to a conference where somebody gives a presentation and the ask at the end is to give money away. So I hope everybody, I don't know when that's going to happen again. I'm going to give a bit of an overview about what's happening in the U.S. music industry. You've gotten a preview of this, both from Don and from Larry, but I'm going to provide a little more data. And I also want to say that these are going to be the biggest numbers I've ever presented. Unfortunately, it's not because the market's doing that well. This is just the biggest screen I've ever had to present numbers. So I want to just give a little bit of perspective before we talk about a lot of detail in terms of what's happening today in the last couple of years. It's good to step back for perspective to see where the industry has come from. Back in 1999, and we talked about this earlier, the industry was about $15 billion. And I think one part that might have been left out was something else happened in 1999. Does anybody remember? It was Napster. So this is the chart that I show people whenever they have any questions about the effect that piracy had on the music industry. So, you know, as Don rightly said, the industry basically had a long period of decline, a lot of years of double-digit declines between 1999 and 2010. But then from 2010 to 2015, we kind of reached a plateau where the industry was about flat at $7 billion. And at the point we were saying flat is the new up, so flat was better than down. And then now we've had 2 years in a row of growth, and as Larry said, that means we've taken a decade to get back to where we were in 2008. But while it might look the same on the surface, there really are a lot of changes under the surface, and we'll talk about some of those changes. This is a little more detail about the last 5 years. We're going to go into all of these different pieces of the industry in a lot of detail so we can say what's going on. We've got physical sales, digital downloads, streaming, and sync. You can see that over the last couple of years. And a lot of the slides, I'll present the 2-year growth. So we're seeing the change not just from last year, but the change from where the industry hit that plateau for a long period and how it's developed. Let me just add 2 things about the data. First, everything I'm presenting here today is publicly available on the RIA website. I see people taking cameras out to take pictures of the slides. You can send you the slides, you can get the data, so you don't have to take notes. I'm the only one who has to take notes. The second thing is I wanted to tell this crowd, which I think this crowd might be interested in, where this data comes from. Our data is put together from revenue reports directly given to the RIAA by its members. So this includes Warner, Sony, Universal, and the literally thousands of distributed labels that are part of those companies, or at least distributed by those companies. We aggregate all of that data at this high level, so we don't have like individual CD sales, we just have these highly aggregated numbers. And then we use SoundScan and BuzzAngle and other third-party sources to put together estimates for the part of the industry that we don't have. So for truly independently distributed artists, we are accounting for them as well. And we end up with a view of, generally at retail, the size of the recorded music industry in the United States. Okay, so back to the data. We talked about the changes in the industry. One of the big milestones that we've hit that we hit in 2017 is that it was the first year where there were 1 trillion digital streams in the United States, and that's trillion with a T. So it's a truly incredible number. I think it might be a surprise to some people that internet radio is such a big part of that. Internet radio includes Pandora, iHeartRadio, simulcasting, pretty much any kind of digital radio service is going to be included there. Then of course we have ad-supported video, that's YouTube, Vivo, primarily those two groups. They used to be a lot bigger than subscription, but subscription has grown so much in the last couple of years that it's now the biggest part of the on-demand streaming world. And of course, we've got ad-supported audio on demand, and that includes basically free Spotify. So we've seen a lot of change. We've seen a massive increase in the number of streams, and we've seen a change in the composition. I'm asking you to remember this because we're going to come back to this a little bit later. Whenever anyone asks a question about what's going on in the market in 2017, whatever the question is, the answer is always going to be streaming. So we'll go into the various aspects. The big blue bar here is paid subscriptions, and that has been the primary driver of the increase for the industry over the last couple of years. You can see how much it's grown. Collectively, streaming more than doubled over the 2-year period, from 2.3 billion to about 5.7 billion. The other areas of streaming that we'll talk about, this smaller, it's dark blue, it might be hard to see, is on-demand ad-supported streaming. So that's again YouTube, Vivo, free Spotify. And then in green we've got what used to go through SoundExchange, but for simplicity we'll just say it's anything that's similar, digital radio and radio-like services. So Pandora, iHeart, simulcasting, satellite radio, that's all going to be part of that bucket. Now we talked about how much the industry has changed. From 2008, it's been a complete transformation. Looking at this 10 years ago, physical was 2/3 of the market. Digital downloads were less than 1/3 of the market, and they were actually still growing. So digital downloads at one point reached about half of the total market. And then streaming was just a glint in everyone's eye of what could potentially be. And now, jumping 10 years forward, we can see the industry composition today. Streaming in 2017 was 2/3 of the market, and just an incredible change. Physical fell from 2/3 to less than 1/5 of the market at 17%, and digital downloads fell even further to just 15%. Of course, we've got sync, which has been 3% and relatively steady. So the industry has had a tremendous transformation in what I think is an incredibly short period of time. And if you compare music to any other major media formats, whether it's movies, books, magazines, newspapers, no other industry has transformed into digital and then streaming revenues that music has. So let's talk about some of the specific pieces of that streaming market. Paid subscription, of course, is the biggest piece. This is by revenue. It reached $4 billion in 2017. So that means it's effectively tripled, more than tripled in just a 2-year period. One of the things I think you'll see as a trend is that the market is getting more complex, and I'll share more about that. But one thing we started doing in 2016 was showing some differentiation between the different types of streaming services, even under paid subscription. So now we're breaking out what we're calling limited tier paid subscriptions. So this would include services like Amazon Prime, Pandora Plus, services that give you some level of interactivity, but not the full on-demand experience. The full on-demand services are going to be Amazon Unlimited, the full paid version Spotify, Apple Music, of course, which launched in 2016 and was a large driver. So those limited tiers, that differentiation is starting to increase. And I think it was about 10% of the market in 2016 and up to about 15% in 2017. So we're seeing more differentiation even in just this one category. Now, what is driving those paid subscriptions, of course, is consumers. Just like the revenues, the number of paid subscriptions has also more than tripled over that 2-year period. This is also a number of subscriptions, not subscribers. So a family plan that could have a couple of different users, we're only counting as one. And these numbers are averages for the year. Based on this sort of rate of growth, this is basically adding 1 million subscribers a month. One of the earlier panels, I think somebody asked about, what are the key performance indicators for the industry? And I would say, in terms of what's driving the growth in revenue for the last couple of years, this is the KPI. Look at the number of paid subscriptions that are coming out, and that is what's driving the revenue. Just for comparison, I checked some other subscription services. Right now, it looks like Netflix has 50 to 60 million subscribers in the United States, and a service like SiriusXM has 27 million. So just so you can see where this stands in comparison to some other groups. Something like cable subscriptions are nearly 100 million. I didn't know if I was going to be the first person to talk about the value gap, but apparently I think it was discussed this morning, so this will be the second one. And this is a nice illustration of the value gap. On-demand ad-supported revenues is basically a fancy way of saying the services that let you download, let you stream what you want on demand for free. So that would be primarily YouTube, Vivo, the free version of Spotify, and then there are a couple of other smaller services. But those are the primary ones. And if you think back to those slides from the beginning of their presentation, you saw that they made up a massive amount of streaming. They account for hundreds of billions of streams. They account for a quarter of all the streams. And yet they're contributing 660 million. And I know anything in hundreds of millions sounds like a lot of money, but this is actually a relatively small part of the industry. So this is 8% of total industry revenues. It's only 12% of streaming revenues. So what you have are services that are offering pretty much a full on-demand experience, accounting for a massive amount of listening and contributing a very, very small amount of revenue to the industry. That is the fundamentals of the value gap. The last big piece of streaming, of course, is the radio-like services. You can see in blue, these are SoundExchange distributions. This used to be a lot easier to track. All of those services used to pay their revenues out to labels and to artists through SoundExchange. But then in 2016, some big